from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. With our submissions portal closed once again for another year, and the most terrifying time of year officially upon us, I'm sure you're well and truly hungry to get straight to some scares. So I won't take up any more of your time tonight. Let's get straight to our fiction. We have one tale for you this evening about a girl trying her best to live a normal life and a set of imaginary appendages that refuse to be ignored. Our story tonight comes from Grace Daly. Grace Daly is a disabled author with multiple invisible chronic illnesses who lives near Chicago. Her debut horror novel, The Scald Crow, is forthcoming with Creature Publishing in fall 2025, and her fantasy novella, The Star of Kilnally, is forthcoming with Bridget's Gate Press in spring 2026. She can be found at gracedailyauthor.com or at gracedailyauthor on Twitter and Instagram. Children of the night, join me for Grace Daly's Shoulder Blades, first published in the anthology Rewired by Ghost Orchid Press, autumn 2022.
When she was born, they were small. Visitors were too distracted by her dough ball feet, cinnamon fat rolls, and oven-fresh biscuit skin to notice. Even her own parents didn't notice, but that could be excused. You would have to know what you were looking for, and of course they didn't know how to look for them. Besides, there was so much that was perfect about their newborn, and there were other problems that required more immediate attention. For example, she was having trouble sleeping. Her mother would gently lay her on her back in the crib, but after a few minutes, she would howl until she was held against someone's chest. Her father was a doctor and knew that babies should sleep on their backs. Parenting books agreed with him, but the parenting books couldn't hear her wailing, and he could. Eventually, he decided she could sleep on her dangerous stomach. He thought that parents who hadn't slept in days were a bigger threat to her life than sudden infant death syndrome. And he was probably right. She didn't suddenly die as an infant, at least. They were bigger by the time she was old enough to speak in proper sentences. She still slept on her stomach, or sometimes on her sides, because lying directly on them hurt. The mattress pushed against the sharp, bony nubs, and the pain would spread through her chest and into her neck. It felt like she was trying to sleep on her fingertips. She thought about cutting holes into her mattress to rest the nubs in, but knew it would make her mother angry. She didn't know how adults ignored the pain, so like any intelligent child, she tugged on her mother's long skirt and asked, "Mommy?" "Yes, Jubilee," her mother answered, while continuing to peel potatoes for dinner. "What do you call the sharp things on someone's back?" Her mother rested her hands on the counter, still holding the potato and peeler. and looked at her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Jubilee scrunched her nose and tried to explain. "Behind your shoulders, like right here." She reached a little arm across and over to touch her own upper back. Her mother smiled, understanding now, and resumed peeling. "Those are your shoulder blades." Jubilee nodded thoughtfully as she pictured long swords bursting out of her back. It was a good name for them, since they were on the backs of her shoulders and sharp like blades. "Do your shoulder blades ever hurt, Mommy?" Her mother intonated thoughtfully. "Sometimes, especially if I slouch too much when I sit. That's one of the reasons why it's so important for a lady to sit up straight." Jubilee nodded. She did slouch a lot. Her mother would gently remind her to straighten up several times a day. She would have to do a better job of being a young lady. By the time she was old enough to menstruate, the nubs had developed into 2 spindly growths. Each was nearly a foot long with a bendable joint at the halfway point, and 5 tiny nubs at the tip. Most of the time they laid tucked along her spine, and she could ignore them. But she always thought it was sort of creepy when they woke up and started moving around. It was almost as gross as her periods. Of course, they still hurt, but only a little more than when she got cramps. She chalked it up to being part of growing up, and tried not to complain. She wasn't sure how everyone else kept their shoulder blades so still and so flat against their backs. She couldn't even see them through their clothes. Though, to be fair, everyone in her tight-knit community wore loose outfits, baggy polos, and flowing denim dresses. She figured part of the purpose of bras was to strap your shoulder blades down somewhat, but she hadn't started wearing a bra yet, so she hadn't tested it for herself. And that didn't explain how men or the other children were hiding theirs so well. Sometimes she wished she went to a public school instead of being homeschooled, so she could see immodestly dressed people up close. Not to sin, of course, just out of curiosity. But she would never ask. It was better to have her curiosity unsatisfied than to risk lust. Still, when her family went to visit her aunt, uncle, and cousin for a weekend, she was excited. Cousin Amy went to public school and had a computer in her bedroom so she could watch movies and look at the internet without supervision. Jubilee had never stayed overnight before because her aunt and uncle made some sinful choices her parents didn't approve of. Public school, unsupervised internet. But they had finally deemed her old enough to be trustworthy in the face of temptation. She was grateful for it and would honor them. After dinner, Cousin Amy knelt on the floor of her bedroom near a bookcase that had a stack of 12 DVDs on the bottom shelf. "Okay, what do you want to watch?" she cheerfully asked. "I've seen all of these loads of times, so you can pick." Jubilee hesitated and felt her shoulder blades start to jerk around by themselves. She hastily knelt next to Cousin Amy with her back facing away, so Cousin Amy wouldn't see the fabric of her shirt move. She was embarrassed that she hadn't learned how to control them yet, when she was nearly a woman. She looked intently at the DVD cases to distract herself. There weren't any VeggieTales or animated versions of The Pilgrim's Progress at all in the collection. In their place was a lot of pictures of boys and girls together, touching, sometimes even kissing. Jubilee's stomach flipped at the shameful images. She had always gotten nauseous easily, and now was no exception. She hastily picked up the only one she saw that had 2 women on the cover, instead of a boy. The younger woman was wearing an immodest dress that showed her collarbones, and even the old woman's top was low-cut. But it was the best option. "Oh, Princess Diaries is fun!" Cousin Amy nodded approvingly. "I love the makeover scene, don't you?" "I haven't seen it," Jubilee admitted. Cousin Amy gasped like the burning bush had just materialized next to her dresser. "You haven't seen the Princess Diaries? Oh my God, we have to watch it! You're gonna love it!" Too nervous to refuse, or point out Cousin Amy's taking of the Lord's name in vain. Jubilee climbed onto the bed to watch, putting a pillow between her back and the headboard to avoid crushing her shoulder blades. Why every chair didn't have a squishy back was beyond her, but she assumed everyone around her was just better at ignoring the pain their shoulder blades caused, and so she never complained. It was rude for a young lady to whine. She focused on the movie instead. There were a lot of immodest skirts, and there was a lot of swearing. Or she thought there was. She was pretty sure "shut up" was a swear. Still, she enjoyed it. The music was fun, and the colors were so bright, and Cousin Amy was right. The makeover scene was the best. Throughout, Jubilee remained mystified by how everyone's shoulder blades were so smooth against their backs, invisible under their clothes. She couldn't even make them out in the few quick flashes of women's backs during the beach scene. It wasn't until the end, when the princess wore the immodest dress that showed her shoulders and the top of her back, that Jubilee realized the princess didn't have shoulder blades at all. "Why doesn't she have any shoulder blades?" Jubilee asked Cousin Amy, confused. Was there some subplot where the princess was deformed that she'd somehow missed when she went to the bathroom? Cousin Amy paused the movie. "What?" "Shoulder blades. When she turns around, she doesn't have any. You can tell because the dress is so revealing." Cousin Amy looked baffled and amused, certain she'd missed the punchline of a joke. "Anne Hathaway has shoulder blades." "No, she doesn't," Jubilee maintained, being disagreeable despite her upbringing and feeling guilty about it. "Look, rewind it a few minutes. I'll show you." Cousin Amy flattened her lips into a line, but did as she was told, pausing when the princess's back was facing the camera, and Jubilee said, "There, see? No shoulder blades." Cousin Amy laughed awkwardly. "Her shoulder blades are right there. What are you talking about?" What?" Jubilee was thrown, but insisted. "No, they're not. I guess she could have the bottoms tucked into her dress, but we should see the tops of them at least." Cousin Amy leaned away from Jubilee with an unnerved scowl, as if Jubilee's delusions were communicable. "I don't know what sort of joke you're playing, Jubilee, but it's not funny." "I'm not joking." Jubilee could feel her eyes welling up with frustrated tears. What sort of sinful prank was Cousin Amy playing on her? "The princess doesn't have shoulder blades." "What do you call those?" Cousin Amy's pointer finger jabbed towards the ridges on the princess's back. Jubilee had those ridges, too. They were right under the base of her shoulder blades. "Those are just... well, I don't know what they're called. They're just some bones in your back. They're not shoulder blades," Jubilee tried to explain. "Those are shoulder blades." Cousin Amy crossed her arms. But if those were shoulder blades, what were the long, painful appendages that moved on their own, growing out of Jubilee's back? She needed to know. "Amy," she asked, dead serious, "can you take off your shirt?" Cousin Amy recoiled even further. "Ew, no! What are you, some sort of lesbian?" Jubilee huffed. "I don't know what that is. I just want to see your back." "It's a girl that likes other girls, like a pervert." "Are you a pervert?" Cousin Amy sneered. "No, I don't like anyone. I'm too young." Jubilee parroted the answer her mother always interrupted with whenever an adult asked Jubilee if she had a crush on anybody. "And when I do get married, if I'm blessed, I'll marry a godly man. But right now, I just want to see your back." Cousin Amy faltered and acquiesced, but kept the sneer on her face. "Fine, but just my back. I'm not taking off my whole shirt." "Okay," Jubilee agreed readily. That'd be enough to see. When Cousin Amy turned away and lifted up the back of the hem of her t-shirt, it was enough to see. Enough to see a long, unmarred expanse, like the surface of a pond, rippled only by a few waves of cresting bone. There were no shoulder blades. Shoulder not blades, Jubilee mentally corrected herself, as bile climbed up her throat. She ran for the bathroom and reached the toilet barely in time to vomit the hamburger she ate for dinner into the basin. The princess wasn't deformed. She was. She heard Cousin Amy's hesitant knock on the door. "Jubilee? Are you sick?" "Yes, I'm sorry. I'm very sick," Jubilee said, through tears that were increasing in ferocity. She wasn't sure if she was crying because she was deformed or because of the pain in her sinuses from vomiting so fiercely. Do you want me to get your mom or your dad?" Amy offered. Her dad! Her father was a doctor. He could probably just have them removed. He must be friends with loads of surgeons. "Yes, Amy, get my dad, thank you." She flushed away her vomit. A few moments later, when her father knocked on the door asking with concern in his voice if he could come in, she sobbed loudly in relief. "Yes, Dad, come in." He entered and knelt down on the floor next to her. Soft brown eyes and graying brown hair, level with her face. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Do you have a fever?" He touched the back of his hand to her forehead without waiting for a response. "No, She stumbled, not sure where to begin her explanation. Her father took his hand back and waited patiently. She took a deep breath. "I have something on my back. 2 somethings, like big things. And they've been there a long time, and they move around, and they hurt. And I thought it was normal, and that they were my shoulder blades. But it turns out shoulder blades are something different. The princess in the movie had shoulder blades, and Amy doesn't have any. I mean, Amy has shoulder blades, but she doesn't have the things on her back, and I think there's something wrong with me, and I need surgery." Her father frowned a bit and tried to follow the story. "There's something on your back, and it hurts?" he clarified. Jubilee nodded emphatically. "Okay, then." Her father tried to smile reassuringly. "Let's just have a look." He lifted up the back of her shirt, and she felt uncomfortable having someone see her almost naked, even if it was her father, even if he was a real doctor. But she kept quiet. It was necessary if she was going to get them removed. He vocalized. "I don't see much of anything. A little bit of acne, but that's normal for someone your age. I have a cream for it at my office if you're this upset about it. Though I'd encourage you to be less vain." That wasn't possible. She felt the shoulder knot blades jump. "They just moved. Did you see it?" Her father sounded befuddled. "I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing moved. Is this some sort of prank children are playing nowadays?" Amy was hovering by the door and interjected. "She was trying to play some sort of trick on me too, Uncle Mark." Jubilee's tears started up in earnest again, and she wailed, "No, I'm not playing any tricks or pranks or making a joke. There are these long things growing out of my back. They've always been there, but they're getting longer, and they move by themselves, and they hurt, and I want them gone." Her father stood up, and suddenly his kind face became hard and foreboding, the face of the head of a house. "Young lady, you will not talk back to me," he lectured sternly. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but I will not have your lies in this family." "I'm not lying," Jubilee begged, and her mother appeared in the doorway next to Cousin Amy. "Mark, she asked Jubilee's father. "What's going on? Is Jubilee hurt? If she keeps this up, she will be." Her father answered darkly, and Jubilee tried to stifle fearful sobs. Her mother glanced down at her quickly, but then returned her gaze to Jubilee's father. "What should we do?" she asked, an honorable wife as always. "We'll leave early tomorrow morning," her father answered, "and take her to the church to talk with Pastor Ryan. Maybe he can tell us what's happened to make our little girl defiant." He looked down at Jubilee, still curled up on the floor and biting her finger to keep cries from escaping. "I'm disappointed in you, Jubilee," he said. "I thought you were old enough to withstand the wickedness of the outside world, but it appears I was wrong." "I'm sorry, sir," she mumbled. Her shoulder knot blades twitched erratically, but she didn't bother hiding what nobody could see. The next evening, Jubilee studied the thumbs of her folded hands in Pastor Ryan's office while he and her parents talked. They were agreeing that such abrupt introduction to the corruption of the outside world had likely triggered her outburst, and Pastor Ryan was assuring them that he had no doubts that Jubilee would still grow to be a devout, God-fearing woman. Her left thumbnail was slightly larger than the right, she dully noted to herself. Pastor Ryan asked her parents to leave so he could have a word alone with her. They left the room trustingly, and Jubilee kept staring at that left thumbnail. "Hey there, Jubilee," Pastor Ryan said, too friendly. He was a young pastor, way younger than the old pastor, Pastor Bill, but he still treated her like a little kid. "Would you mind telling me what's been going on?" Jubilee furtively shot her eyes up to his, and then looked back down. I think there's something wrong with me. I have these things on my back, and they hurt." "Yeah, your dad says something like that. He's really worried about you, and I am too. Everyone here at church wants you to feel safe and happy, which is why we can get scared when you talk like that. We just want what's best for you." Pastor Ryan smiled benevolently, with two pink lips. "I know," Jubilee muttered, ashamed for making everyone worry about her. "And I know you're going through a tough time right now. Your body is going through changes because you're becoming a woman. And I know that can be scary, and you can feel really alone. And so maybe you come up with some wild ideas, some crazy fantasies, and you think if you can get other people to pay attention to you, you'll feel a little less scared and a little less alone." Pastor Ryan continued, smiling even bigger. "I get it. When I was your age, I caused all sorts of trouble just because I felt lonely." Jubilee looked up at him to study his sandy hair and ruddy cheeks, trying to imagine Goody Two-Shoes Pastor Ryan ever being a troublemaker. "Really?" "Really?" He nodded back at her declaratively. "But one day, I realized I could leave all that behind me. Because I wasn't alone. I would never be alone again, because I let Jesus into my heart." Jubilee's eyes returned to her thumbnail. She thought to herself that this problem was out of Jesus' depth, and then immediately sent a thought apology to God for blasphemy. "Okay," she told Pastor Ryan. "Okay," Pastor Ryan said cheerfully, slapping his knees as if he had just finished handing out the loaves and fishes himself. "I'm glad we had this chat, Jubilee. I know in the future you'll act with the grace and humility a child of God should. And remember, you're never alone." The shoulder knot blades jerked unpleasantly and bent at their middle joints, trying to rip out of her shirt. She waited for him to notice. When he didn't, she ducked her head deferentially. "Yes, Pastor," she agreed. "I'm never alone." She couldn't believe it as she sat in her dorm room, looking over the mostly unpacked boxes. Her own dorm room, by herself. Of course, she had to share the kitchen and the bathroom with 3 other girls, and it was a Christian dorm affiliated with the church on campus that didn't allow any boys in, ever, not even if it was your brother. But the tiny bedroom was hers, and hers alone. Not quite alone. The arm growing out of her back on the right side grabbed a plastic mug from the desk next to her and hurled it against the wall. It made a loud cracking sound, but didn't break. "Was that really necessary?" she said to her shoulder-knot blades. "See, this is why we have to have plastic dishes. You can't be trusted." She knew the arms weren't really there, but she still talked to them sometimes, just in case. She imagined they were angry to be neglected, angry to not be acknowledged. She tried to appease them by cutting holes in the backs of her shirts for them to thread through. Though, if she thought about it too much, she realized she must also be imagining the holes she cut into the shirts, because nobody ever seemed to notice those either. And of course, she must also be throwing her cups and pens and hairbrushes around herself without realizing it. She's also making up the way the arms do sets of push-ups whenever she lays on her back. Up and down and up and down. So she still can't sleep in that position. It's funny, though. You'd think if she was going to go through all the trouble of hallucinating a set of arms sprouting out of her back, they'd look like her arms. And they did, sort of. They were the same skin tone, and they had similar chubby fingers. But they were a little bit longer, and a lot more muscular than her real arms. Of course, the muscles might just be from throwing stuff and push-ups. The throwing stuff and push-ups that she's imagining. She tried not to think about it too much. She had other more important things to think about today, namely, what she was going to wear out to the bar tonight. She didn't know which bar. She'd never been to a bar. And she was going by herself, so she couldn't judge based on anyone she was going with. She refused to marry a godly man without at least going to a bar at least once. That, and watch whatever TV shows she wanted, and use a tampon. That's why she wanted to go to college at all. Of course, that's not what she told her parents. "I've prayed about my calling," she'd said, dripping with sincerity. "And though I am called to be a wife and a mother, I know it is also in God's plan that I care for His children, like you do, Dad. It is God's plan that I become a physical therapist and get an undergraduate degree in kinesiology." Aside from that one outburst one time, she had always been a perfect daughter, so they allowed her to go. What a shame it was that the closest school with a kinesiology program was too far away for her to live at home. What a shame. She chose the tightest pair of jeans she owned, and a V-neck top that showed her collarbones. She then took her hair down from its bun. It was nearly long enough to sit on, and began braiding it into a crown wrapped around her head. Her fingers were deft after a lifetime of braiding up the river of modesty, so she only had to restart twice, when the shoulder-knot blades' hands tangled their fingers into her mane and pulled. This was, of course, why her hair was always pinned up. She knew she was imagining the arms pulling it, but it still made her scalp ache. She swiped on some lip gloss she swiped from Cousin Amy a year ago, and looked in the mirror, ignoring the arms angrily swiping the air behind her. She was still too modest, too plain, but she could almost pass as a regular college girl who had hippie tendencies. Close enough. She left her dorm building and began walking towards the downtown. At the first bar she came across, she tried to order an orange soda, but the bartender got annoyed and told her they didn't have orange soda like it was obvious. She was ashamed by her mistake, So she asked for a Pepsi, which they did have. She chastised herself for not fitting in better and vowed to try harder. So when a woman sidled up to her a few minutes later, she was as friendly as possible. "Hey there, beautiful," the woman said, with a generous smile of teeth whiter than lamb's wool. She hardly looked like a woman. Her thick, dark, curly hair was shaped into a short pompadour, and she wore a slim-fitting tan plaid suit with combat boots. Her body was shapely, though. She was a woman. "Hi," Jubilee chirped. "I really like your hair." "Thanks." The woman smiled a little larger and leaned in a little closer. "I like yours. You look like a princess." Jubilee blushed a little. Was this flirting? She couldn't flirt with a woman. "I'm sorry." Jubilee demurely glanced at the woman's keen eyes and away, as the arms behind her twitched in agitation. "I'm not interested in girls." "Well, it's a good thing I'm not a girl, then." Jubilee snapped her head up to assess the man's face. His face really looked womanly to her. She realized she was being rude and blushed harder. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were a man. I guess I looked too quickly. My mistake." "I'm not a man either," the person answered, laughing good-naturedly at Jubilee's flummoxing. The arms behind Jubilee wrung their hands. "I'm sorry?" Jubilee apologized and asked simultaneously. "You haven't met someone genderqueer before?" They were uncommonly patient, seemingly recognizing the origins of Jubilee's modest clothing. "No." "Well, I'm not a woman or a man. I'm something else." "That's an option?" Jubilee clarified. She had heard of men pretending to be women and vice versa, and people always talked about it like it was perverted, the same way they talked about girls liking girls. She didn't really see any problem with it herself, though. Maybe it was just their way of dealing with their own imaginary arms. She hadn't heard of not women or men, though. "Sure. Look at that bathroom sign over there." The person smoothly claimed the stool next to hers, as they pointed at the plaque on the door to the unisex bathroom. "See how there's a stick figure in the dress, and the one wearing pants, and in between them there's a line? I'm the line in the middle." Jubilee laughed. They were funny, this in-between person. Talking to them was nice. "Can I buy you another drink?" they asked her, gesturing towards her nearly empty glass. Sure, I guess." "What are you having?" "Pepsi."
"Pepsi, huh?"
The person sucked air through their teeth and winced a little. "Any chance you're new in town?" "Yeah." Jubilee fiddled with her straw. Her shoulder-knot blades grew increasingly irate behind her, while the person signaled the bartender for another Pepsi. "My first day at college, actually."
"You look older than 18.
"Yeah, I'm 21. It took some convincing to get my family to agree that going to college was my calling," Jubilee explained. What had really taken convincing was avoiding getting married, but she had managed it. The person nodded their head, suspicions confirmed.
"Well, let me be the first to welcome you. I'm Frankie."
"I'm Jubilee. It's really nice to meet you." She smiled coyly, maybe a little flirtatiously. She couldn't flirt with a woman, but Frankie wasn't a woman. She curled around Frankie's back on her narrow, twin-sized mattress. Men weren't allowed in her dorm, but Frankie wasn't a man. So here they were in Jubilee's bed. Jubilee was always the big spoon, because it still hurt the shoulder-knot blades to press up against anything. She'd told Frankie about them. Frankie couldn't see them either. But at least they didn't act like she was crazy or a liar. They just politely gave her pillows to rest her back against, and were the eternally little spoon. Jubilee nuzzled her nose into the back of Frankie's sleeping neck gratefully. She ignored the flailing shoulder knot blades behind her, and drifted off herself. A few hours later, she woke up to something thrashing. The whale that swallowed Jonah, brought to land and getting crushed to death by its own weight in her bed. But there wasn't an ocean nearby, and the whale was dry. And the whale had fingers. Fingers with nails painted green like Frankie's, desperately ripping at the neckline of her practical flannel pajamas, scraping her collarbones underneath. She squinted her eyes and shook her head. What was going on? She couldn't think over the rasping, gasping, gnashing suffering right by her face. She had fallen asleep next to Frankie, and now there was a whale dying in her bed, but it wasn't a whale at all. It was Frankie, with Jubilee's hands wrapped around their neck. Jubilee pulled her hands away and clutched them tight to her chest, but her hands were still strangling Frankie, and Frankie wasn't struggling anymore. Jubilee forced her fingers underneath the palms that were hers, but weren't hers, and were killing her lover, and tried to pry them off. She shook with terror and anguish and fear for Frankie, and the terror made her muscles weak. She couldn't peel the hands that weren't hers away from Frankie's throat. She felt through her knuckles as Frankie stopped breathing. Only then did the shoulder knot blades release their hold. "What have you done?" Jubilee shrieked, voice running up 2 octaves as she scratched at the arms that weren't hers. "Frankie! Frankie! Oh my God, Frankie!" The shoulder knot blades nabbed Jubilee's braid and yanked firmly, snapping her neck back. Her vision flashed for a moment, and she tumbled backwards onto the floor, landing on her shoulder knot blades and feeling a sharp pain in her actual shoulder blades underneath. The shoulder knot blades began to beat her heavily about the face, pain exploding like the 4th of July across her cheekbones. She stumbled out of her dorm room into the shared common area and kitchen, failing to dodge blows and failing to accept that Frankie, the only person who loved her, the real her, was gone. If the arms were gone, Frankie would come back. She just had to destroy them, and Frankie would be saved, and Jubilee would be loved. She reached the knife block and pulled out the chef's knife, quickly making the godly choice. "And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." Matthew 5:29. She knew it by rote. She sliced haphazardly behind her back. The knife reverberated when it hit. Warmth poured down the back of her practical flannel pajamas. The shoulder knot blades gesticulated wildly. They grabbed for her wrist. She held the knife far away, kept it out of their reach. She would finish the job if it killed her. The arms that weren't hers were longer and stronger than her own. They grasped low on her right forearm and pulled it inwards, forcing it towards her chest, and adjusted their grip, inching closer and closer to her wrist as she lost ground. The warm blood had soaked all the way down to the backs of the knees of her pajamas, and was continuing to flow even lower, and she was growing dizzy. She sobbed, and heard her roommates stirring in their own dorm rooms, and wildly hoped they would come out and save her. Of course they couldn't see what she was imagining. But how could they not see this? She wasn't imagining this. This was real. The hands that weren't hers reached her right hand and began to wrestle the knife away. She tried to peel them off with her left hand, but only succeeded in slicing open the backs of all her fingers and making the knife slippery with fluid. As her muscles finally gave out, her right hand was forced open, and the knife was plunged into her chest. She thought one last guilty apology to Frankie, and one last guilty prayer to God. She fell onto her back, hearing the humerus of one shoulder knot blade snap underneath her. The knife passed from one hand to the other and continued to slash at her, slicing open lips and ears and eyelids and throat, while Jubilee's own 2 hands lay limp at her sides. Mercifully, she had already lost too much blood to remain conscious. The arms didn't stop until she lost too much blood to remain alive.
That was Grace Daly's Shoulder Blades, as read by Jennifer March. Jennifer March has a passion for literature. She created a local radio show called Not Your Mother's Storytime, which has become a podcast with thousands of listeners who appreciate classic short stories. She views storytelling as an essential and ancient part of society and civilization. She believes every culture has its stories and its tellers, and she is honored to be one of them. Thank you, Jennifer. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we sow the seeds of sorrow with more Tales to Terrify.